Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive, sweeping piece of history from 1906, the Bambatha Rebellion. It's a story of thousands of Zulu warriors rising up against the immense power of the British Empire, fighting back with spears, rifles, and literally everything they had. Now, they might have lost the physical war, but their story is absolutely crucial to understanding modern history. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly why this incredible resistance sparked, how it all played out, and why its legacy is still so incredibly relevant today. Right off the bat, let's start with a mystery. Chief Bambatha Rebellion was the fearless leader of this resistance. At the end of the conflict, the British colonial forces claimed they had cornered and killed him. They even produced what they said was his severed head as proof. But did the rebellion truly die with him right then and there? Was that head actually his? As you'll see, the historical record gets super murky, and the legend of Bambatha was really just getting started. But before we can talk about his fate, we've got to rewind a bit. Why were these thousands of men risking absolutely everything?
Section 1. The Catalyst, Economic Oppression. To understand the breaking point in 1906, we need to look at the decades right before it. After the British defeated the Zulu kingdom back in 1879, they completely dismantled the Zulu monarchy. They carved up the land and put it under the colonial administration of Natal. And for the Zulu people, life changed overnight. The British weren't just hanging out, they were systematically extracting resources. They took the land and they took the labor. Chief Bambatha watched this happen to his people, and you could imagine the anger was just steadily building.
The tipping point finally hit in January 1906 when the colonial government rolled out a poll tax. Every single African male over 18 had to pay £1 a year. Now, £1 might sound like absolutely nothing to us today, but we have to put that into perspective. Most Zulu men at the time were subsistence farmers. They traded in cattle and grain. They operated in a totally cash-poor economy. So demanding £1 in hard cash, that was an impossible hurdle for almost everyone.
And here's the kicker. The true purpose of that poll tax wasn't just to raise money. It was engineered poverty, a calculated mechanism of control. The colonial government knew these guys didn't have cash. So when they couldn't pay, they were forced into wage labor. Suddenly you have cash-poor farmers breaking their backs on white-owned farms or down in the mines just to pay off this manufactured debt. Add in hut taxes charged per dwelling, pass laws that restricted movement, and land alienation pushing them off their ancestral homes. It's a system designed for compliance. The choice was brutal. Go to prison, or work for the exact people who took your land.
Section 2. The Tactical High, Nkandla Forest. Faced with this impossible economic trap, Chief Bambatha made a massive decision. He flat out refused to collect the poll tax from his people. It was a bold act of open defiance. Naturally, the colonial government threatened to strip his title, and the authorities came for him. But Bambatha didn't surrender. He fled. But he didn't flee to hide, he fled to fight. He retreated into this incredibly rugged mountainous region that the British would find a nightmare to navigate, the Nkandla Forest.
Bambatha was a brilliant tactician. He knew there was no way his warriors could face British rifles and artillery out in an open field. So he used the terrain to his advantage. He relied on this simple but highly effective strategy. Strike from the forest, vanish into the trees. He turned the lush, dense canopy of the Nkandla Forest into a literal fortress. Using guerrilla ambushes and hit-and-run tactics, he completely outmaneuvered the colonial forces. Other chiefs actually joined him, and this massive wave of resistance spread. For months, the British were totally rattled by this unseen army striking from the expansive heights of the forest.
But here is where the momentum tragically shifted. Bambatha's warriors eventually moved from the lush, expansive, tactical haven of the Nkandla Forest and set up camp in a place called the Mome Gorge. Now, the gorge is a completely different environment. It's this dark, incredibly steep, narrow valley carved right between towering cliffs. Bambatha's forces thought this dark, enclosed space would keep them hidden and safe from the British. But instead of a haven, it became a totally claustrophobic, inescapable trap.
Section 3. Darkness at Mome Gorge. Let's really slow down here for a second to grasp what happened next. Deep inside that gorge, Bambatha's forces were resting under the cover of darkness, but British intelligence had successfully tracked them. During the early morning hours, thousands of colonial troops silently moved into position. They completely surrounded the gorge, placed highly trained riflemen all along the steep ridges above, and set up heavy artillery right at the only exit to the valley. Then, in complete silence, they just waited for the sun to rise.
As dawn broke on June 10, 1906, the trap was officially sprung. The sun crested over the towering cliffs, brightly illuminating the trapped Zulu warriors below. The British forces, holding the absolute high ground, now had a perfect, clear line of sight right down into that steep, narrow valley.
What followed that morning wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Bambatha's warriors had absolutely nowhere to go. The slopes of the gorge were just far too steep to climb. British rifles poured relentless fire down onto them from above, and the artillery blasted the gorge entrance, completely cutting off any chance of retreat. Hundreds of warriors were killed in just a matter of hours. The aftermath was utterly devastating. All told, over 3,000 Zulu men died during the rebellion and the brutal crackdowns that followed. Thousands more were thrown into prison, and the colony of Natal completely reasserted its harsh authority. And to really seal their victory, the British publicly displayed a badly mutilated, severed head, claiming it belonged to Bambatha himself. They were basically declaring to everyone, the head of the rebellion has been cut off. The physical war was over.
Section 4. The legend lives on. Now, remember that mystery we opened this explainer with? The British desperately needed a decisive, unquestionable victory, and producing Bambatha's body provided exactly that. But among the Zulu people, the people who actually knew Bambatha up close, the story was very different. They took one look at this highly mutilated, practically unidentifiable head produced by the colonial forces, and they simply refused to believe it was him. Which brings us to this incredibly powerful question. Did the rebellion really die with him? Almost immediately, rumors began to spread. You see, in a society where oral tradition carries enormous, vital weight, the official colonial record was flat-out rejected. The stories passing from person to person didn't speak of a defeated chief lying dead in a dark gorge. No, they spoke of something entirely different. Through the immense power of oral tradition, a new narrative emerged that built a lasting legacy. Because that body was so unidentifiable, stories multiplied that Bambatha had actually slipped right out of the trap at Moma Gorge. There were persistent rumors he had escaped across the border into Mozambique. People even reported sightings of him in Swaziland for decades. Through these stories, he was completely transformed from a defeated leader into a mythological hero of resistance. A hero who was alive, waiting, and who would one day return to finish the fight. Section 5. Inspiring national freedom. That transition from mortal man to powerful myth is exactly why the Bambatha Rebellion matters so much. Sure, by any military measure, the rebellion failed to drive out the British in 1906. But the visceral reaction to that colonial extraction, the sheer refusal to just pay the poll tax and quietly submit, it completely shook the African political consciousness to its core. It birthed a lasting ideological victory that would eventually change the entire country. You can actually draw a direct historical line from this uprising. Just 6 years after the rebellion, in 1912, the South African Native National Congress is founded. That's the organization that would eventually become the ANC. The memory of Bambatha fed directly into that movement. He became the ultimate symbol of refusing to submit to injustice. And that political consciousness carried straight through the 20th century, fueling the broader anti-apartheid movement. Even though mainstream Western history books have often glossed over this conflict, the towering figures of liberation never did. Nelson Mandela himself explicitly invoked the Bambatha Rebellion. Anti-apartheid activists carried his legacy forward as a touchstone of pure dignity. They fought against impossible odds, much like Bambatha's warriors did against the might of the British Empire. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Can a defeated rebellion still change a nation forever? Back in 1906, thousands of men walked into those forests knowing they might never come back, simply because the alternative of silent submission was unacceptable. Whether Bambatha died in that dark gorge or disappeared into legend, his name survived to inspire an entire century of resistance. Some wars absolutely shape a nation's future, even when the rest of the world forgets them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring these powerful hidden histories.